I don't know about you all, but the first thing I do when a new 4-star gets announced is taking a look at this Constellation 6. Ever since HoYoverse introduced this concept where 4-stars can get their entire existence explained by a single constellation, I have this constant dread that it is going to happen to every 4-star. So whenever that's not the case, that's quite a surprise. Lynette is a character who can stand on her own legs even at Constellation 0, which is a rarity for 4-stars, and has a set of uses that make her just much more than a sidekick to her brother's magical performances. In this video we'll go through all of this, and make sure to watch it all, as for whatever reason I've spent more time theory crafting for this one than for whatever other video I've made in the past. So if you enjoy my work, make sure to smash the subscribe button and leave a thumbs up if you haven't already. Lynette is not a character that revolutionizes the Anemo element, as she comes to the game with a set of characteristics that really resemble Kazuha in particular. Her elemental skill is a standard one-time hit that has a tap and a hold version, and both of them will deal damage to one enemy. The only advantage the hold version gives her over the tap version is that it allows her to do a Yelena-style dash, but for the rest, both have the same damage, and the same cooldown of 12 seconds. Her 70 energy cost elemental burst will create an object on field that will taunt all surrounding opponents, deal AoE damage within a good circular range, and single target elemental damage based on the element it absorbed, just like most other Anemo units. Again, just like Kazuha, she has the means to buff allies with one of her passives, as her Ascension 1 talent will allow her to buff allies' attack for 10 seconds, by an amount that varies depending on how many different elements are on the team. Just for a second, I want everybody to focus on her elemental skill cooldown, and what it matters for. Lynette's elemental skill has a 20 seconds cooldown, and that means that sadly, in rotations that are shorter than 24 seconds, she will only be able to use it once a rotation at Constellation 0, which is typically not enough to fund their 70 cost burst without immense energy recharge investment. For this reason, giving her Sacrificial Sword is pretty much a given on several teams if you have her at Constellation 0. As a whole, her artifact build if used as a support is naturally the good old Viridescent Menhir set for resistance reduction purposes, but if she's used for damage, then you can opt for more offensive options like the new Marashus set, which is perfect for her, since what I didn't tell you before is that her elemental skill will cause her to lose HP and then progressively regain it starting from a second after use, something that will single-handedly make her able to activate the set stacks and keep them for pretty much her entire damage window. Damage, 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 but is it actually good? Yes. For the Anemo off-field damage niche, the benchmark is Kazuha in general, because he's both best at raw damage dealt and sword damage. For the latter, Lynette can pretty much be equivalent to him, because she'll be able to trigger a similar amount of swords as his during the rotation. Of course, however, Kazuha has a significant AoE advantage thanks to grouping capabilities and an elemental skill that has intrinsic AoE, unlike Lynette's. Still, the real good part comes from the more offensive builds, where Lynette is holding Marashus, as I said earlier, and Kazuha is holding two sets that buff Anemo damage. Other than having a clear artifact set advantage, Lynette performs well because her multipliers are rather impressive, even at Constellation 0. Her only drawback compared to Kazuha is that she won't be able to snapshot, but this is not necessarily a con, because in rotations where you want to maximize things like Bennett's elemental burst duration for a carry with long field time, like Wanderer, using Kazuha's burst between the two isn't exactly optimal. Regardless, Constellations give Lynette a big edge even over the amped version of Kazuha, which is really impressive. Let's check these constellations then. I stated earlier that she's pretty good at Constellation 0, but by that I didn't mean her constellations were trash. Specifically, they're pretty good if what you want is to increase her raw damage dealt specifically, as her Constellation 4, which gives her an extra elemental skill charge, as well as her talent levels constellations in general, are quite relevant for her overall output. Additionally, some constellations add interesting effects to her kit, like the Constellation 1 that adds grouping to her elemental skill, and the Constellation 6, which gives her an Anemo infusion on auto attacks after using her skill, something that opens up for interesting possibilities that I'll analyze later. Regarding her grouping effect, it sounds nice, but in practice it seems to be a considerably weaker version of Kazuha's grouping capabilities, as it has the same pull strength, but not nearly the same duration. So what will realistically happen is that opponents will get pulled in by a bit, but then it will stop. Speaking about the Kazuha comparison more for a second, while her damage output is seemingly similar to his if both are investing on elemental mastery, that doesn't mean she can just outright replace him on every team. The reason is that Kazuha just has the better buffing passive, as Lynette's attack buff is decent, but not on the same level as a significant damage bonus. In particular, this buff of hers just lasts for 10 seconds after she uses her burst, something that fares badly in teams with long rotations like Quicken. On the other hand, Kazuha can simply continuously refresh his buff with any of his abilities when needed, and that gives him a flexibility edge, on top of him being a better grouper and better AoE character as a whole. Still, Lynette deserves a bit of praise for her elemental burst taunting opponents. It might not be super significant, but technically it still gathers some opponents in one spot initially, which can be effectively considered a grouping ability. Still, while Lynette doesn't fare well against Kazuha at what he does best, she really stuns him in another aspect, which is viability in mono Anemo teams. As I've shown you earlier, Lynette's damage just has bigger potential than Kazuha's, and that makes her perform really well on teams where that's actually magnified. Furthermore, her attack buffing passive is pretty relevant here, as she can buff characters like Wanderer through that, while Kazuha's buff is irrelevant in this case. The result is that the Lynette variant of Wanderer Mono Anemo just comfortably surpasses Kazuha's even at Constellation 0, and at high constellations it's not even a competition. In particular, she performs so well that her Mono Anemo variant can easily compete with the best variants of Hyper Wanderer team. Her weapon selections for this role are as follow. Wolf Fang, the new Battle Pass weapon, is just very impressive, and will be a perfect pick even at Constellation 0. Since on this team she doesn't have particular energy needs thanks to all the Anemo particles generated throughout the rotation, she can just go all in on offensive options, which allows her to use all the massive 5-star options quite easily. It's not the end yet. There is another role I want to talk to you about, and that is Lynette Hyper at Constellation 6. As I said earlier, her Constellation 6 allows her to get an Anemo infusion on auto attacks for 6 seconds after she used her skill. Since at Constellation 4 she gets 2 charges of it, that allows her to maintain the infusion pretty reliably while on field, and for a considerable duration. The results are quite impressive, because in a scenario where she's on field, she's also getting buffs from Bennett for her burst and skill, so her damage profile just turns into something that can really be a match for other good hyper carries. In particular, she doesn't perform particularly worse than Wanderer on the same team as his, and with a weapon that roughly matches his in terms of relative damage performance. Note that the rotation I put for Lynette is technically worse than the other options that involve more charge attack spamming, but I just thought that it was the most realistic option in terms of stamina expand. So there you have it. In my opinion, Lynette is a very good 4-star character, as she performs really well in a niche at Constellation 0 while still being pretty good in other roles, and her constellations just add to those aspects. While her Constellation 6 technically adds something entirely new to her kit, it's not something that raises her ceiling, as her hyper comps are not really at the top of the meta. So I would consider Lynette to be a perfect standard to follow for 4-star releases moving forward. However, take notes, I'm done for today. As always, if you liked the video, make sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe and leave a comment. See you next time!